the interconnectedness, the way that we rely on them, their sheer wonder in how they connect to the forest floor and this mycelial underground network that is just, the Earth's immune system. So there was always this like deep sense of magic where I was like, what is this thing?
Hello, yogis, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Dharma Talk. I'm your host, Henry Winslow, and this is episode number 67. This week I have a different kind of episode for you. My guest is not a yoga teacher. However, she has used yoga to move through a difficult period in her life and, on the other side, come into a deeper understanding of her true purpose, her calling, her dharma. And that is to inspire and educate on how to use plants, fungi, and food as medicine. These are other forms of exploration of the body and mind, and I'm excited to share with you her level of expertise very soon. But before we talk more about this episode, first I want to make a shout out to my friend Joshua Judd for making a donation to support Dharma Talk. Thank you, Joshua. I really appreciate it. Every donation really touches me and makes a big difference. If any other listener would like to make a donation to help support this project, you're always able to do that through the website, henrywins.com/dharmatalk or dharmatalk.show. There's a little PayPal button there, and you can make a donation to support the show. Now, about this week's programming. My guest this week is Tonya Papanikolov, and she is a bona fide expert in mushrooms. There's so much to know here, more than most people are even aware that you can learn about. And this conversation will most likely be mind-blowing for a lot of you if you haven't dug into this topic on your own. We talk about, first, her background, walking into the unknown, and how yoga helped her move through a pivotal transition period in her life. And then we get into the mushrooms, talk about mushroom consciousness, mycoremediation, and how fungi can heal not only our planet, but also our human bodies. We get into mycophobia and sorting out rational caution from unconscious social conditioning when it comes to the fear of fungi, which is very real. Also, we broach the topic of psychedelic mushrooms, microdosing, and the potential of psilocybin for therapeutic use. And finally, Tonya shares the new product that she has created for you to absorb the balanced benefits of medicinal mushrooms conveniently and efficiently. So all that is coming up very soon. Please just stay tuned through these announcements, and we'll dive into my interview with Tonya Papanikolov. Hey yogis, this is what's coming up on my teaching calendar. I hope that you can join me for some of these events. This Saturday at 3 Jewels in New York, I'm giving a workshop called Purification Practice, Mantra, Pranayama, and Kriya for Clarity. This is a non-asana workshop, and it's accessible to all levels, anyone interested in going deeper into the subtler practices of yoga. Also, this week is your last chance to sign up for the JMY Advanced Teacher Training happening at Lighthouse Yoga School over July and August. It starts on Monday, so if you want to get in, it's not too late. You can apply. Please use Henry Wins on your application to get $100 off the tuition. Apart from that, I have some rocket yoga events coming up at Pure Yoga West in August and October. And then later in the year, I'm heading to Austin and Dallas, Texas, and later Mexico for some weekend immersions. So please get all the details for these events at henrywins.com/events and sign up. What's your purpose? What's your vision? What mark will you leave on this planet long after you're gone? I'm Henry Winslow, and you're listening to Dharma Talk, the only podcast where I interview inspirational yogis on how they're changing the world in their own unique ways. Whether you're still searching for your purpose or already walking the path, I hope these stories get you excited to live your Dharma. Hello, Dharma Talk community, and welcome back to another episode. Today I have my new friend Tonya Papanikolov on the line. Tonya is the founder of Rainbo. That's Rainbow with no W, a medicinal mushroom brand and product line that just launched. She is a holistic nutritionist and the creative force behind The Well Woman, where she inspires and educates on plants, fungi, and food as medicine. Tonya, I'm excited about this conversation. I'm excited about your new brand and everything that you have to share. So, how are you today?
Thank you so much, Henry. I just got really excited because you pronounced so many things correctly, like my last name and fungi. And thank you for the beautiful introduction. I'm really excited to be here too.
Wow, I feel flattered that my pronunciation was approved. Well, let's roll with this positive momentum. The first
Yeah.
question that I'd like to ask you, I ask all of my guests, is this: what does the word dharma mean to you, and what is your dharma as you understand it today?
So, Dharma, the word Dharma and the meaning and kind of feelings that that invoke for me, as it's been something that has kind of been something I've worked towards and spent a lot of my 20s trying to figure out what that meant to me. But for me, it's really just about my calling and, or one's calling and one's gift, and kind of just that unique um, fingerprint, soul print that a person has, that can really light up the world and light up your life and provide such a deep sense of meaning. So, yeah, I guess for me, Dharma is really just about uh, that vocation and that calling and that deep meaning of a soul's journey of, what we're doing here. And my understanding of my own Dharma is, I guess, really simply just that I've always known that I'm here to help people, and that's something that I've always said to my parents. Even I think I was around 4 or 5 years old when I first told them that, and just kind of made it, like a stark declaration of that to them. And I do remember that moment, and I think children are so tapped in and at such a close, direct source to what's beyond where we came from, and I think that they hold keys to parts of our soul before we get kind of conditioned by life and by society. So yeah, I guess kind of blanket statement is just that I'm really extremely passionate, and I know that my soul's purpose is to help people on our planet, and that kind of happens in a variety of different ways.
I love that story because I can imagine a young Tanya looking up at her parents and saying that. What was their reaction?
um, they I mean, they knew that I really wanted to. I was just like a different kid, and I probably had like my Fisher Price doctor's bag in my hand at the time, and would be like putting band-aids on them, or something silly. Like, I was pretty animated, and I think they loved it, and they were just like, you know interested and intrigued by my early declarations.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with you so much about children being tapped into something that we all know, but tends to get covered up by conditioning and conditioned thought patterns. I'm sure that's
Totally.
something that goes into your idea about what these plants and fungi can do for us. And I'm sure we'll get into that soon. But first of
Mhm.
all, I'd love for you to be able to tie this back to your practice of yoga. How did you come across yoga, and how has that begun to weave itself into your expression of Dharma?
Totally. It is so closely related. And my mom, we grew up in a pretty healthy household. My mother practiced yoga. So I have some really early memories in the 90s of doing these, yoga classes with her, watching this woman on a screen in like a head to toe red leotard type outfit, and just kind of, moving our bodies. So it was interesting to have that experience as a kid. And I really didn't discover yoga again until I was about 18, 17 or 18, somewhere in that range. And I was in university and going to school in Guelph and studying nutrition. And I kind of just went to this random gymnasium and started practicing yoga there. And I it really became something that it's hard to put into words. As you can imagine, yoga has completely transformed my life and my understanding of self and my body and stress and, um, just Eastern traditions and how that relates to consciousness. I mean, so much. But really, I after school, I kind of I wasn't doing too much yoga until I was around 22, and I was in a super high stressful job. I was working in fashion at the time, and I was kind of just, something that I find really interesting with Dharma is that it can also be quite uncomfortable, and because part of our 20s with the cycles of life is just so much about trying to understand ourselves and what we're doing, and it can be a really confusing time for many. So a lot of my Dharma was kind of woven up into this resistance that I had about leaving this role and moving into the unknown, and I really had no idea what that looked like. So it kind of felt like taking a step into the dark. So I remember that process being relatively uncomfortable because my relationships were changing and my lifestyle habits were changing, my health was changing, and I had a big scare that I knew I needed some things to change. And for me, I have such a sensitive body and a very visceral response to stress. So it's really something that I've had to learn to manage. But I basically, long story short, I kind of got into yoga, started using it for stress management and really just helping guide this kind of transitional period of my life where I was leaving a boyfriend and leaving my job and, you know, trying to figure out what it all meant. And all I knew was that I all I could do was yoga every single day. And I would just sit in my practice and tears would come and I would, learn a handstand or some sort of an arm balance. And I just found community. I found a best friend, and it really started shaping my life and my decisions. And from there, I kind of became just I just continued to study. I did my teacher's training at one point as well. And it's just been such an ongoing process. And one interesting story, um, I was reading the Bhagavad Gita. Have you read that?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. So I'd read that, and I was at this point in my life where, again, I was in this job that I was ready to leave and kind of resisting this calling, but really trying to understand it and trying to think my way into what things might look like. And I had this book that literally arrived on my doorstep, which I found out later the reason of how it got there and all that stuff. But it was just this book that completely changed my life called The Great Work of Your Life. And the book is actually all about Dharma and one's vocation and calling and the whole. I'm not sure if you read it or
No,
heard
I'm
of
not
it.
familiar. Is it an explanation of the Bhagavad Gita?
It's not yeah, it's by no means like an in-depth explanation, but he references it throughout the whole book.
Mhm.
And
I see.
he's kind of, the author is from like the Kripalu Extraordinary Living Center. I might have gotten that wrong, but something along those lines.
Mhm.
He's like a student of yoga, and it's just it just really touched me and had a really 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 deep impact on um, me being able to get to this place where I was completely ready to just walk into the unknown of really following what I felt I was meant to do here.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I can totally relate to that story. I also had a background, as I'm sure many people who have followed the path of yoga in the modern age do. I had a background of going down the path that didn't align with my own personal values,
Mm-hmm.
but due to conditioning, due to um, basically following the guidelines set by others and impressed upon me, I believe that was the correct path. And doing yoga, practicing yoga regularly, there was something about that that attracted me and kept me coming back. And without even me being aware of it, it was slowly chipping away at those conditioning patterns and bringing me back into closer alignment with knowing what it is that I actually wanted to be doing. And for me, that was to go on and pursue yoga, not only as a personal practice, but as something to share as a teacher. But
Hmm.
that's very interesting that that you were able to use yoga in the same way, but it guided you not necessarily onto a career path related to yoga, but it was still a useful tool to put you on your true path.
Definitely. Yeah, it is. It will always be such a big part of my lifestyle, and that has taken different types of what that has looked like has turned up differently in different parts of my life. And I had a very kind of deep and committed asana practice for quite a long time, and now that's transitioned into much more deeper meditative practice.
Hmm.
Um, so just kind of letting that ebb and flow as well, because definitely when I got into yoga, it was like meditation, like what's that? I wasn't as connected to that, but I it's so funny. I can't even imagine one existing without the other, because they're so closely tied, and it has become such a large part of how I do work, just because it's just how you be and your being.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it definitely, yeah, exactly. It didn't take me down the teaching path in that respect, but had
What
huge
does your
impact.
practice look like? What sort of meditation do you practice?
So I've kind of gone back and forth over the last few years with trying out different things. I was trying out transcendental meditation for a little bit last year, and I kind of flow in and out with that at some point in the day. But a few years ago, I discovered Kundalini yoga, and that has been so powerful. Um, just in terms of the way that it can elevate me and people who do it. So I usually have some sort of a morning practice with some of the kriyas that I'm working towards, and I usually try and stick to a practice for 40 days,
Hmm.
um, and and really just focus on that in terms of committing to something, and um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, the Kundalini tradition actually teaches that 40 days is a very sacred, I guess, amount of time, and it's the amount of time that it takes to establish a habit.
Hmm.
Do
Yeah.
do you
Yeah.
have a personal favorite Kriya?
Right now, I've been working on the magnificent meditation, but I there's so many. I mean, I go back to the addiction meditation all of the time. It was funny when I started practicing the addiction meditation. I noticed that I started being on time for everything, if not early, and I would just like be forgetting my phone in different rooms and leave the house without my phone. So it was cool to see it strip away at some of the things that I didn't necessarily think I would. Not that I didn't think I was addicted to certain devices, but it has such a deep permeability into parts of the subconscious, and yeah, that was pretty powerful.
How fascinating. I'm not familiar with that meditation, so I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, do you ever practice Kundalini?
Occasionally, I do. I have a few kriyas that I really like to practice. I love the ego eradicator, and I love the Sudarshan chakra kriya.
Mm, beautiful.
So tell
I
me
started.
how. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I started implementing the cold showers every morning,
Oh yeah,
and that was something I resisted for a long time, especially when I first started learning Kundalini. Um, and then I just became so amazed at the way that I felt in the mornings.
so sharp.
After having a cold, so sharp, so alert. The entire body just feels completely drained of any puffiness, inflammation, like anything. Um, so it's a really beautiful way to start the day, and just kind of like cultivates that power of the mind.
For sure. Yeah. That seems like a nice segue to move into a topic that I know is near and dear to your heart, the fungi. So, how did you start to cultivate that interest, and how are you using fungi to continually sharpen your mind?
Yeah, so I've been interested in mushrooms for a long time. I started learning about how to forage them about 5 years ago in the Canadian northern forests with some friends who were, superfood enthusiasts. And I just felt like I had so much to learn. And it was around the time when I was maybe around like maybe even 7 years ago. I can't quite remember, but I started learning about superfoods and adaptogens and elixirs and all of those types of things and the adrenals and just kind of a whole range of different things. And when we would go out and forage for mushrooms, there was always this like deep sense of magic where I was like, what is this thing? Like, I feel so at home in the forest. So I'm an earth sign, and it's just it feels like church, going to church when I'm in there. So I guess, yeah, the initial kind of spark started there and in nature. And about a year and a half ago, I just started doing a lot more research on mushrooms and how they can. It was Paul Stamets, and I was reading all of his books um, about mushroom cultivation and how mushrooms can save the planet. And it was just an interesting time. I feel like there was this wave of mushroom consciousness that prepped into the minds of many. It was before Michael Pollan had written his book as well, and it just felt like this surge of something hard to explain that was just there. And previous to that, I had been using, like about 3 years ago, I was doing some liver healing and using reishi therapeutically, and that was extremely effective for me. So I've always been using tinctures or capsules, at least, not always, but at least for the last 3 years, and then started really digging into just what they are and what the kingdom represents, and the interconnectedness, the way that we rely on them. There's just sheer wonder in how they connect to the forest floor, and um, this mycelial underground network that is just the Earth's immune system. So I really just became so passionate about it, and I have so many ideas all the time, and so it's been really interesting because this has felt like it has completely taken me on, and I've just been this like passenger, and it's been such a wild and fun and interesting ride that I didn't think I'd be on, because my background has not been in like anything business related.
Mm-hmm.
So I've really had to kind of like show up in a new way and learn different skill sets, and there has just been this deep connection that I've had with these mushrooms that have really like guided me along the way, and made everything just feel like I was in flow state.
Well, since I have you on here and you are such an expert on the topic, um, I'm sure there are many listeners who don't have the slightest clue of how important and diverse these mushrooms really are. I feel that yes, there is like sort of a consciousness around this, and it's becoming a bit more in the zeitgeist to to talk about mushrooms. But some people don't even know that it's like a different kingdom, and
Right.
and mushrooms are more closely related to animals and us than even plants are. Can you give us sort of a 101 on why fungi are so important, and what you mean when you say that mushrooms can save the planet?
Definitely, yeah. So um yeah, I love that you said that, because we are closer, humans are more closely related to mushrooms than we are plants, and we broke off from that genus billions of years ago. But it's the way that our cells are formed and the way that we utilize enzymes to digest our food and different things like that that kind of connect us to that kingdom. But um, there's a lot of really, really amazing stuff happening right now with mycoremediation. And mycoremediation is really using mushrooms to clean up and enhance the soil. And so you can think of mushrooms like these. So okay, so there's a lot. There's the mycelial network, which is basically this underground network that connects all of life in on the forest floor. And any old growth forest will have a pretty healthy mycelial network. Cities, it's a little bit harder to find that in cities, just because we've obviously changed the land here, but it's basically this wide-spanning network that is used to connect plants, to connect trees, to connect this entire web of life that is existing underneath the forest floor. And it's used for communication and, nutrients to be passed through to different plants. They communicate and, tell each other about predators that are, kilometers away. So that's kind of one side of it. But on the other, they are also cleaning up the environment and cleaning up the soil. So this, if you think about a tree falling in the forest and eventually that kind of rotting and turning back into soil, it's the mycelium and these mushrooms that have the responsibility of turning this death, kind of this dead plant, into nutrition. So they're these, soil decomposers, and we really rely on them for the health of our soils. So it's been kind of said that they're considered to be the Earth's immune system, in that they can take, all types of different waste products and turn it into healthy soil. And there's been some pretty cool studies just about how, mycelium can literally turn like tar and oil spills back into soil. And although it's not, soil that you'd want to plant anything in, it can at least clean it up and change that into something that is, nutritive.
Right, right. And if it serves as Earth's immune system, in a way, you could also say it's serving as the Earth's central nervous system by conducting all of these collaborative communications between the plants.
Totally, totally. And it's interesting too that it has a similar effect in the body as well. Um,
Meaning
whether
what?
it's whether it's a medicinal mushroom that has the ability to, lion's mane, for example, has a direct effect on, cognitive function, and has the ability to regrow nerve growth factor, whereas other mushrooms are, chaga mushroom is one of the highest antioxidant foods on the planet. Um, and so that has the ability to kind of get into our cells and, work with, from an antioxidant perspective, to combat, DNA damage. It has anti-cancerous properties. So there's so much. There's so much. They do so much.
So, when, or not when, but how did you come across the idea to start a new product line that leveraged the power of these mushrooms?
So it was last February, and I was, I mean, it really just kind of came to me in a moment where I was listening to um, a podcast and reading a lot of books. I was reading the book Food of the Gods by Terence McKenna, and it's kind of hard to explain. It really just kind of dawned on me that I wanted to work with this kingdom and help expand mushroom consciousness at this time. And there's so much mycophobia, and a lot of people just don't really know about, the power that these mushrooms have. And so it really kind of came to me in a very fast instant, in the same way that the Well Woman, and the idea of really educating people in that, on the perspective of holistic health. It's kind of hard to put into words. It was just this moment where it was very clear, and it was just this invitation. And so I sat with it for about a month before really talking about it with anybody. And I intuitively kind of had this like little ceremony with myself where I kind of brought together the books, like all of these. I had a night to myself, and I had all of these. I had a huge piece of paper, all these books from all different types of authors that have inspired my journey. Everything from like mushrooms to gut health to you name it. Just, really inspirational figures and authors, and my own teachers. And I kind of just had it might sound silly. I just had this evening and I just brainstormed, and I wrote down. I was just mind mapping and just writing down all these words and ideas. And from that kind of, it just became really clear that this was something that I really wanted to do. Um, and then I have had, yeah, just amazing friends and a team around me that have really supported it and allowed the vision to come to life in ways that have really blown me away.
Hmm. You mentioned mycophobia. Where do you think this fear stems from, and why is it so pervasive?
Well, mushrooms are, they can, they can heal you, they can kill you. They're with some good reason. You know, you don't really want to just go into your backyard and pick a mushroom, that's growing in your backyard and eat it, because they do have, such vast potential to do harm and to also heal. So, I think from a media perspective, if you're tuned into, like, getting kind of updates on what's happening, I think there was like some crazy story about a Michelin star restaurant in Portugal who unfortunately served um, a wrong mushroom, and it did end up killing somebody. So I think that, and I have conversations with this with people who are like, "Ooh, mushrooms," and I'm like, "Okay, let's kind of break this down. Why do you feel that way?" And they would share that it was kind of like something that their parents told them, like, you never eat mushrooms, you don't do so and so. So I think it's partially this kind of thing that, as if you're a kid exploring in the forest, if you live in nature, there's some kind of conditioning around, that they're just not to be touched and eaten.
Hmm.
So that's one side of it, and then there's also, from a therapeutic side of things, in terms of psychedelic mushrooms, those obviously are class 3 and, illegal mushrooms in Canada and the US and all over the world, um, and viewed as, these kind of bad drugs, when um, they're finally coming to a point now where there's a lot more research that's going into it, and a lot of people are a lot of people and organizations are showing their effectiveness in therapeutic settings. And yeah, and Terence McKenna too talks a lot about, consciousness and free free will, and the ability to explore our own consciousness through mushrooms and entheogens. So I think it's kind of multifaceted in terms of why people fear them, um, weaving into the psychedelic realm, and also just the fact that, mushrooms actually can also do harm in the body.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's a complicated answer to a complicated uh,
Mhm.
social conditioning, I'm sure. Um, I wondered if you would touch on those points because, to the idea of the poisonous lookalikes. I mean, you could say the same thing about berries, right? You don't go and pick random berries out in the woods and eat those because you have the danger of poisoning yourself there too. But then there is something about like even little kids like just being naturally grossed out by something maybe that grows out of the ground, and yet we grow out of the ground. We're products of earth too. So it's a tricky thing, and it's something that I try to wrap my head around too. Is like, why do certain things irrationally scare us or disgust us that are natural?
It's, yeah, it's so true. Um, and I think so much of it too comes back to our culture and conditioning and parenting and all those different types of things. Um, Even I think we see those differences too in North American culture versus European, and in Europe it just being a little bit more like free reins to fall and scrape yourself. Um, and not be quite as fearful. But again, it's hard to kind of like, it's multifaceted. There's so much that goes into it,
Mhm.
and we also live in a time where nature is so feared, and we try and control it, um, and think that, there's that we have some power over it, without the realization and deep understanding that we're just all in this together, and, in it and with it and of it.
Mhm. And at the same time, as you alluded to, Michael Pollan came out with the book How to Change Your Mind, and there does seem to be sort of a renaissance happening now around mind manifesting earth medicines. um, whereas in the 50s and 60s, it was more of like hippie culture, which carried its
Mhm.
own baggage and connotations. Now there are all these studies going on. Johns Hopkins is running these studies, clinical studies, powerfully and traditionally powered with double-blind, placebo-controlled, all of this stuff around
Mhm.
psilocybin.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time, and people are really interested in the potential of mushrooms. Microdosing is such a hot topic now as well, and I have tons of people asking me about that as well. So
Yeah. Not that we can officially recommend any illegal activity on this podcast, but is that something that you have experience with, microdosing?
I have, yes,
And
yep.
what has been your experience with that? What sort of effects have you seen personally?
So personally, I anytime I'm going into it, it's always with a very clear intention, and it is really about like time alone. And for me, it's a very heart opening experience. And so I kind of tune into what my needs are for the day, and it's kind of a clear day that's off to myself, or kind of in the setting where I can be creative and look at something from a different perspective. So I often mind map on days like that, and I just try and look at things from a different perspective. Um, so yeah, it's very very subtle, and it it yeah, I just recommend like easing into it. Some people really don't feel it, but it kind of just depends on like what your intention is, and so many things play into it. But I think it just needs to be an intention
Hmm.
oriented experience.
Yeah, I think that's a piece of this that sometimes gets lost in the popular conversation, that these plant and fungus medicines really are not party recreational drugs if you don't use them that way. And people have an idea about things being dangerous and destructive and addictive, but when they're used, as the name implies, as mind manifestors, you can have a
Hmm.
totally different experience with that, that's very internal, very reflective, and meditative, quite honestly. Have you faced a lot of external judgment for your choices to pursue this, or has it been mostly from yourself?
Um, do you mean rainbow or even microdosing?
Either.
Um, I haven't experienced external judgments that I'm aware of, anyways. But yeah, it was more so internal judgments of kind of does this align with me, and why do I consider this a drug, and just kind of really you know in the last 2 years, just looking at things from a completely different perspective, and looking at the research, and that in and of itself is hard to ignore. So it was really just kind of changing my own perception of how I viewed it, um, and I would never use the word drug to describe mushrooms.
Hmm.
Um, so just becoming much more thoughtful and aware of what their potential really is, um, and and yeah.
So tell me, what has been your biggest challenge in bringing Rainbow to life, and what was the lesson that you took away from it?
Hmm. Um, It's a really good question. I guess that my biggest challenge with Rainbow has been kind of trying to. There's been many. Trying to understand business has at first was kind of like it seemed like this monumental thing that I was like, how am I ever? I've never taken one business class, and I'm supposed to have like a financial plan and all these little things that at the beginning was just like, I was just kind of making it into this big mountain. Um, and the more I surrounded myself with the right people, and, got the right assistance in doing that, it obviously just became something that was a lot easier. And again, less of something that was a huge challenge, and just more of something that I grew to understand, and have an understanding of, but also just kind of have people that are good at that to help me with it. So I would say some parts of business, like even managing some form of a supply chain, has been very new. So there's been so many new things that I've had to learn, and that's been pretty cool in hindsight. Um, and I would say the other element has just been finding balance, because I am just, the nature of me when I am passionate about something is that I really go full force into it, and I have to learn about boundaries, and it's something that I have to continue to work towards. And I have two businesses or passions that I now have, which is the Well Woman, which has become this extension of me, and now Rainbow as well. So there's been this kind of feeling of being on this seesaw of trying to find some, form of balance between that. And then as of late has also been, really, I have such a fine-tuned relationship with my body that, stress is something that I contemplate all the time, and longevity is something that I'm so passionate about, and I really believe that we can live into our hundreds, and that if we just go a little bit slower with life, that it can just be extended by years and years, along with diet and a whole bunch of other lifestyle factors. But yeah, I mean, it's just so easy when I'm alone in nature. It's like, if I'm out of the city and I'm working, and I'm able to do that there, it's just a completely different energy. But my being in the city really is, it just gets me into this energetic state. So I have had to be so conscious of myself, and of what I believe time to be, and how I make time, and just being so intentional with everything. So I've definitely had moments in the past 2 weeks, where I've just felt like, there's not enough. I'm so aware of like the story that is so easy to fall into, so it won't last too long. But it feels like a very transitional period, and launching something and bringing it into the world that you've been working on for a year without really sharing too much with too many people is has been a really, really interesting experience, and that has brought up a lot for me to kind of work through and process, and have kind of like my circle of care to do that with.
For sure. Yeah, I feel that we all have probably by now a pretty good understanding of what Rainbow represents, because it's an extension of your philosophy and your journey of growth and understanding. But what is the product itself, and what was your goal for that? What do you hope that people will experience from using the product?
So the product itself is one product right now, and it's called 1111. And I really wanted, when I'm in the kitchen in the morning and making a morning elixir, I was putting so many different mushrooms into it, and mushrooms have a really, really incredible property of working like in synergy with one another. So I basically just wanted to create a tincture, a product that was potent and bioavailable, um, and that combined all of the mushrooms that I wanted to work with. So I think of it as a multivitamin, but a multi shroom. So there's 11 mushrooms in this tincture, and they're dual extracted. So that means that they're extracted via hot water and also extracted via alcohol. And a tincture is for anyone that doesn't know what it is, it's a pretty classical, um, form of an herbal medicine in herbal medicine. And there's, it's a 70% spring water, 30% alcohol, and there are various nutritional compounds, some that can only be extracted via the water aspect, and some that can only be extracted via alcohol. So I wanted to combine the two of them.
And how do people use it?
You could use it directly under your tongue sublingually. I have it every single morning in a matcha or in some sort of a beverage or elixir that I'm making. And I'll put a whole range of kind of my chosen adaptogens that I'm working with and the mushrooms, and it has become part of my morning ritual. But I take so much of it, so I probably high dose it. But I would say the best way is it's just so easy to drop. I wanted to create something that was easy and efficient for people to use, so the tincture allows for that. You could put it in a little bit of water, um, but yeah, I would say coffee, tea is
And,
the easiest route.
and with that cocktail of different mushrooms, is the effect pretty holistic, or is there a specific kind of mind shift that it tends to yield?
I would say that my own experience of it um, has been well, my own experience has actually been more of a cognitive shift more than anything. And I ran a pilot study, and now that it's actually out in the world and people are taking it, the most of the feedback I get is that it feels extremely energizing and that they can feel it kind of like instantly. And mushrooms are different in that, it's not caffeine, so you really do have to work with mushrooms and adaptogens over a long period of time. Like every day for say 7 days, 40 days. Ideally, you're up to that 40-day range, because that's the kind of the way that adaptogens work, in supporting the body over a long period of time.
Just like Kriya's.
Just like Kriya's, exactly.
How do our listeners pick up a bottle?
You can pick up a bottle right now just on the website, rainbo.com, rainbow with the W. And in the future, I'm definitely in the works of getting some great stockists in New York and different parts of the US, as well as in Canada. So that's coming. We just had our pre-sale, and everything is starting to ship next week. So it is all happening. You can check us out on the website. That would be the best way.
Awesome. Congratulations on that, on the launch.
Thank you. Thanks.
Are you willing to do a discount for the Dharma Talk listeners if they purchase on your website?
I would absolutely love that. And I was going to ask you the same thing. So please do feel free to use the code Dharma and receive 15% off your first order.
Amazing. You heard it here first. Go to the Rainbow website and enter Dharma for 15% off your first purchase of the 11, the formulation from Rainbow. Awesome.
I'm going to
Thank
be
you,
sending
Tonya.
you some in New York for you to
Oh,
try out. And
thank you. Oh, I'm so excited.
I can't wait to get it to you.
All right. I think now is the perfect time to move into the final section of the interview. I call this the prana round. I'm going to ask you 6 rapid fire questions. Okay.
Woo! Okay, I'm excited.
All right. Answer in minimum 1 word, maximum 1 sentence.
Okay.
First question in 1 word. Why do you practice yoga?
Harmony.
What is your favorite yoga pose and why?
Mm, crow, because I store a lot of emotions and power in my hips.
Mm. I'm going to add in an extra prana round question. What is your favorite mushroom and why?
Ooh! Favorite mushroom, reishi, because she's the queen of the medicinal mushroom kingdom.
The queen.
The
What
queen.
is the single best cue or piece of advice that you've ever received from a teacher?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't need to be a yoga teacher.
I think that would be trust, continually trusting in myself and just the flow of the universe.
Because they're one and the same.
Mm-hmm. Truly.
Recommend one book. You've mentioned a number of books already, but recommend one book, either modern or ancient, for our listeners.
I think it would have to be, I mean, I'm sitting right beside me. I think it would have to be The Great Work of Your Life and the Bhagavad Gita.
Who wrote the great work of your life?
Stephen Cope.
Okay, Thank you. Is yoga for everyone?
Yes.
Are mushrooms for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, last question. How can our audience get in touch with you, and how can we support you in your Dharma?
Well, you can get in touch with me via email, Instagram, website. So either at The Well Woman Co. or at Rainbow Mushrooms. And I mean, just listening to this and opening your hearts and, reaching out with questions and all of that is supportive and beautiful. So any of that.
Amazing. Tonya, thank you so much for giving and sharing of your time with me and with the Dharma Talk community. I'm really excited to test out your product, and I'm just really energized by the good work that you're doing. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me, Henry, and thanks for those words. And likewise, I'm constantly in awe of your pretzeling on Instagram and the incredible messages that I read every day. So thank you. It's an honor to share with you today.
Hey, Dharma Talk community. If you enjoyed this podcast and you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button right now. And if you'd like to show your support even more, leave me an honest review on iTunes or whatever podcast directory you listen on. You can also make a financial contribution to keep the show up and running, a donation at henrywins.com. And remember, I'm here to serve you. So if you have any questions or comments or ideas, you can always reach me on Instagram at henrywins. Otherwise, I'll speak to you next week. Keep living your Dharma.